Hello and welcome to the J Plus R movie podcast. This is part 2 of our kind of special episode where we're taking a look at a couple of TV seasons as opposed to movies. So this week we're looking at season 3 of True Detective, the HBO murder mystery anthology series. So this season is basically set in 3 different time periods, 1980, 1990 and 2015. And it's all set in Arkansas and like the Ozarks area. Throughout the entire time, we follow this detective named Wayne Hayes, and basically his investigation into the case of these 2 missing kids. We see how this case throughout these different time periods affects him, his personal relationships with his wife Amelia and his partner Roland. Also, we see in each period how the case itself kind of balloons and what he discovers, and we kind of see a few different sides, how he's kind of a loner to begin with, and then in 1990 he's married to Amelia and he has a family, and then in 2015 he's basically a dementia-stricken old man who is kind of just going out to try and put the pieces back together. This 3rd season, season 3, I thought was a very impressive one, and it managed to tell a really dark, really emotional story and also be very, very complicated and weird in many ways.
I thought it was pretty decent. It was, it was quite a dark story. It was interesting that we got to see the effect it had on its personal life. I think sometimes there were scenes in that got a bit redundant, but I'll move on to that later on. It was a pretty decent mystery, and it was interesting to see how long cases like that, how the faces change in them as it goes, and how when you really strip it down, the case only really comes down to about 5 people, but the amount of people that it then includes and involves and affects, even people that weren't necessarily alive or even particularly old when it started. Wayne's son becoming somewhat involved. 2015, despite not even having been born when the kidnapping happened.
The generational quality that you see across all 3 different time periods. To begin with, in this season, I did find that quite hard to follow, the 3 different timelines. It's almost like we're getting the first act, the second act, and the third act playing out simultaneously. As it goes on, it becomes more and more clear that there is still mystery going on, even though you know what's taking place in 90 and in 2015. There's still a lot of like details that you just don't know about, especially very personal ones. And given how the main character has dementia towards the end of it, and he's starting to lose his memory, it's a somewhat clever way of not really letting us know everything that he's experienced, because he doesn't know everything that he's experienced, or he's starting to lose that.
Well, yeah, exactly. It also adds in moments like there's this little suspicion: is he remembering everything exactly how it happened? Because it's so unreliable, especially when you're getting into that when he's being interviewed by the reporter in 2015. There's some of that just feels a little bit. I mean, there's no reason that it wouldn't be, but at the same time, you can't be 100% sure it is true. It leaves real doubt at the end, actually, when he's worked it out, because it's like, did you work it out?
Yeah, or was it just an assumption? In various scenes like that in 2015, when he's being interviewed, there is a sort of conflict between the objective truth and his own memory. And we also wonder, like, who's more right? Is he right in his assumptions, or is she right in what she's saying? And because there are some things that she assumes that turn out not to be the case, and yet a lot of what she's saying does still come off as like logical and what you would think.
It was quite logical the way it went through. The suspects it set up were quite strong, because it did a lot of work in between, and it really did strand in the other themes quite well, because there's quite a big Vietnam trauma theme going through, especially the 1980 sequence. They're all veterans. You can kind of see a little bit of a nasty side and the psychological impact that had. And then, especially in the opening scene when they're just trying to shoot rats and foxes and things, Ronan and Wayne, and that sort of theme arc gets tied into the case, because the town starts, because of the way that the case is being politically handled, which was actually something I thought was quite good. There was there's a little bit of obviously you had this a government official, minister, police chief, I can't remember exactly what it was, that would make announcements about the case before the police were ready to release anything, and it led to the case getting interfered with and messed up, especially by the townspeople who all saw this Native American guy talking to the kids and just out of sheer racism assumed it was him.
It's also kind of a paranoid mob mentality as well of, this looks very, very mildly suspicious, so we're just going to jump on this and just assume that this guy is the one who did it, without anything actually properly logical. It's just purely on instinct that is fueled by stuff like that, like racism, and also thinking like, oh, he's a loner who he could be weird.
I think one of the major themes was doing things properly, because every time things weren't done properly, stuff went wrong. The two leads are fairly corrupt police officers, actually. As much as they're not taking bribes, that police brutality is a real problem in this series. They don't directly address it. They don't kind of sit there and openly condemn it. But what they do is that they show it worked once, and then they later on show it going horribly, horribly wrong.
To give a little bit more detail, there's a scene early on when they find like a sex offender and they interrogate him, and they take him to a barn and they tie him up and beat him up. And then later on, they basically try the same method with a character who basically is very, very important to the actual case and who has a lot of information, but through his own thinking and through their reckless actions as well, he basically ends up, the character's name is Harris. Harris ends up basically getting killed, and they don't have their lead anymore, and it basically ruins their entire investigation that they were trying to do. So yeah, you are correct.
Not only impedes the investigation storyline, but then you see the personal relationship between him and his partner just break down pretty much on the spot.
So that's important to this season as well. Wayne's relationships with Amelia and with Roland, both of them I feel carried quite a lot of emotion. It's a lot of where the emotion comes from in this season, and it was quite interesting to see these opposing characters be kind of put through the ringer by this case, but also through their own actions. Roland and Amelia, you kind of get these two differing perspectives and personalities. There's love, but they are also always like kind of clashing with each other. You see the romance beginning in 1980. You see it really collapsing in 1990, and then in 2015, she's just the hallucinatory figure.
There's some discussion that they might have made it up from 1990 at some point. That they might have reconciled, but then we never actually see that reconciliation particularly.
You did bring it up, and I do kind of agree with the flaw that you brought up earlier, which is that there are only so many times you can see them argue. There are a few too many scenes of them at each other's throats.
They, at one point, kind of just started tuning them out. They didn't often offer that much new information that we didn't already know. So they became, especially as it went on, pointless. And even showing the fight in the last episode, or like kind of basically split them up. It's been like, why? We know you have more kids, so what's the point?
What I thought they were trying to do is they were just trying to show the pressure of the situation just getting to the two of them. But I do sort of agree.
I get that, except we've seen that. There's no point going back to that well.
Could have conveyed the same point, but maybe not have it be a split up argument.
Knew they were going to get back together because they hadn't had the word kids yet. So it was a bit like, that means nothing. If it had been a little different to that, it could have mattered.
The thing that really was compelling to me was the relationship between Wayne and Roland made up the heart of the season. These two pairs of detectives are shown to basically be the best of friends. And it's more sad to watch that relationship break down, and nice to see it then properly come back into the fray, because they're both characterized in ways that you might not expect. Roland at first seems like the cool, calm and collected, but slightly ill-tempered guy. And Wayne seems like
straight man sort of type.
Both have straight man qualities, but you see that a bit more in Wayne. And I think that Wayne has a more sympathetic side. Wayne can be kind of a bastard. He can actually be kind of a bad person. And Roland actually has quite a sincere, decent side to him that he shows towards certain people. And we see that in, for example, the relationship between Roland and Tom, the father of the two kids that go missing, because Roland actually becomes a really good friend to him. And that, in part, is partially why him and Wayne end up splitting up as well, because of certain emotional things related to Tom and what happens to him.
Roland takes it pretty hard.
When Tom turns up, seemingly having killed himself.
Wayne's a little bit more, I wouldn't 100% say uncaring, but there is a lack of emotional response to him. Use it as an obstacle in the case as opposed to a man being dead. And he was really, really worried when Tom disappeared and went off on his own, for example. Nice contrast, because it just showed their two mindsets just drifting apart. Because right at the start, they were thinking very much the same sorts of stuff, even though there were differences. They were very much thinking the same. One line that I always remember is, maybe there's someone we can go beat the shit out of. Boy, wouldn't that be nice? Also speaks to how these guys probably aren't the most above board of cops occasionally.
And we do also get the contrast between how they are, because I think Wayne is a little bit more of that mindset than Roland is. Wayne is more willing to tell his superiors to go shove it, and Roland is a bit more of a kisser-upper to people in power. I think that that's definitely a contrast between the two of them. That Roland, like, obviously, yeah, he was willing to do stuff that wasn't particularly ethical, but he wasn't necessarily. Wayne was way more into that than Roland was. Roland was sometimes was a bit reluctant to do that.
Roland wouldn't exactly push, but he'd also, interestingly, both were quite hypocritical with each other. Roland, for example, would get mad when he didn't always stand up to the authority. Well, there were times that Wayne wouldn't stand up to it. Like the secretary job, for example, Wayne didn't really stand up to that. He just took the offer quite quietly, didn't really fight, then blamed everyone for ending up like that. Roland was 100% telling him to throw his wife under the bus.
Like, Wayne wanted to show a bit of loyalty, but it was a complicated situation and you had two different viewpoints to it. The stuff related to like the pushing away of the job, that stuff happens in like the 1980 section. So that's kind of a split already. But, you know, the much bigger split comes in 1990 for Wayne and Roland, and to see that relationship totally break down in 1990. But we did have the contrast in 2015 of them genuinely becoming friends again. It had a good balance. I want to talk about like the genre of this season, because that was something that was like puzzling my mind. I wasn't really sure what to put it in beyond the obvious. It flirts with the horror genre and the conspiracy thriller genre as well, but it turns out to kind of be neither of those things and more of a tragedy in disguise.
It's all about how stuff dragging on really screwed everybody up, and ultimately it ended up, even when it was concluded, it didn't feel like enough. Nobody actually particularly cared.
The entire resolution of this season is that, you know, they're investigating these two missing kids and they bring up so many like different potential suspects. There are some obvious false ones, but some like potential cases, because, you know, they're investigating and they find out, you know, the connections to the Hoyt family, who are this like rich family of people. We sort of find out a bit about that family history, and we then end up seeing in the final episode how that history really ties into the case of these two missing kids. You know, how the entire thing was basically a set of sad circumstances because the daughter in the Hoyt family really wanted, you know, a surrogate daughter or surrogate kids, but ended up kidnapping the daughter after the son accidentally died, and then basically keeping her locked up in this like pink room. And then the daughter eventually escaped. The daughter has gone missing, and we think in the present that she died. But then what they kind of reveal is that the daughter had her death faked and she was living under a different name. And that's kind of the conclusion that Wayne comes to. And although it's not made hugely clear, I don't know if that's how ambiguous that's supposed to be.
Yep.
I think that is supposed to be true. But the thing about the ending is that they're kind of almost making you live with the ambiguity of it.
Again, because his memory doesn't work, because it's been so long, because all they've really got is one guy's word, really. You sit there at the end and, you know, the case is solved, it's there, but then there's always that second where you're just like, is it though? He's not even sure at the end, because he's just kind of turned around. I think the line is very, you know, he's kind of there like, I'm lost. And it's, you can interpret that two ways. You can very much interpret it as, oh, I've lost my way. I can't think. I've lost my memory again. You know, that kind of thing. I'm not remembering why I'm here. Mm-hmm. Or it can be very much like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what this is anymore. I don't know what this is all for.
In reality, him going to the daughter, Julie Purcell, who is now living under a different name, like, what even was he hoping to accomplish in the first place? It was pretty much just a confirmation of an assumption. And I guess a bit of personal closure for him. In reality, it's like, yeah, she's alive and she's living, and, you know, she's got a fairly happy ending. Is it really worth like jeopardizing that and bringing up painful old memories? At the end of the day, this isn't really your story. This is her story, and she's got a happy ending, and you can't just break that just for the sake of your own personal satisfaction.
It's very much almost his brain going, you're done now.
I do wonder if he did slightly remember. That's also left ambiguous, whether or not it actually came back to him or not. And it easily could have, and it could be that maybe he ignored it, or it could be that he genuinely just completely forgot. And it's a bit of a subversive wrap up, because again, it kind of pushes aside the horror and conspiracy elements to reveal the tragedy stuff, because they're throwing in a lot of hints. They basically hint almost that it could be some sort of human trafficking situation, particularly when they bring up like the pink room and stuff. So you wonder if they kidnap these kids and like, are they keeping them hostage or something in a pink room? And that allows the show to kind of dabble in why that line of thinking can be scary, and also why it can be quite damaging as well.
Yeah, and I think that is quite interesting because all the different theories ultimately create a worse situation. And I
Mhm,
think, I think a big part of it is arguing against making cases like that public.
mhm.
And to be fair, if you look at, historically, if you look at kidnapping cases, if you look at, like, famous serial killer cases and things like that, it getting out to the public quite often doesn't help the situation. I mean, look at cases like Zodiac, for example.
Mhm.
A false lead that they got made it uninvestigatable.
And what's interesting is that this is kind of the case, and so the case is obviously public in the series itself, but even amongst just the personal people who were assigned to investigate it, it's giving them that exact same thinking and feeling.
Yeah, because they are part of that community. They live in that community. They're getting all this crap that they're then having to sort through in their own heads and stay objective with the facts, but they can't because the people around them can't even do that. You even see it in the relationship between Amelia and Wayne. She writes a book with her own theories about it.
You see that in the 2015 interview section, and you also see it in regards to, like, the cousin as well that comes in and is all kind of hinting at the possibility that this could just be government operation or whatever. I think this is a really, really well acted season of television. I think all of the
Yeah.
leads do really excellent work. The obvious one to bring up, Mahershala Ali, he plays the lead role of Wayne and he kills it.
I think he's got the most variety.
Definitely.
As well, because he's playing the guy at 3 different points, and his character is dealing with dementia at one point, and then very much start of the family, and then more optimistic gets into the cynic. So you get the 3 massive stages of his life. And while that's the same of everyone, because the character's dealing with such different things at each point, it's really, really important the performance nails it. And he does. And you can really see Wayne did not have a good ride of it at all. And you can really see the way that affects him at different points in his life. It all feels like the same guy as well. It's not like, there are some films where people are older and it's like, yeah, I mean, you could be the same guy, but you don't feel like the same guy. Whereas one, the character is remarkably consistent despite getting old.
What I think he does greatly is I think he really humanizes the Wayne character because with the writing, I feel with maybe like an actor who's a bit too intense or a bit too angry or a bit too tough or even stoic, I feel like the character could have come off as quite unlikable. But I think
Yeah,
he gives him a genuine sense of humanity. So therefore, even during his maybe slightly more aggressive, jerky moments, you still get to the core of the guy and you kind of sympathize with him. His dementia kicks in that moment, and it's almost like a reminder to kind of tell him.
especially like his reactions when he finds bodies and things like that are
Mhm.
nice, big, they're animated, and then sometimes they're cold, but sometimes they're not. And especially just early on, and when you get those bits in 1980 and you don't really start, the case developments in 2015 take a while to get going. So you connect with the 80s version of him. So by the time that he gets colder, he gets rougher, you've got that empathy as it is, which is, again, me just praising the structure, to be honest. But performance in those times, even when he's being colder, it still allows that in. There's these little pauses that he'll do before he'll answer certain things, or to the point you can tell that he's mentally shutting himself off rather than his mind getting shut off, if you get what I mean, from the different things that happen. That makes it's quite a compelling thing to watch.
Do you want to know who also does an amazing job in this season? Given the last 2 movies that we've covered that this actor in, this might come as a surprise, but honestly, yeah, Stephen Dorff does an amazing job in this season. I think it's a lot different to Ali's work, but I think he actually kind of matches Ali. I think he does really, really well in the role of Roland, and he has some really good moments of emotional acting that really impressed me.
I thought Stephen Dorff was great. I think, especially as at the start, he kind of gave off this vibe that he was both a experienced, decent cop, but kind of dangerous. He spends a lot of the time afterwards dismantling that vibe really well. Seeing where he's diffusing things. Yeah, he's quite skilled about it, but he was also a lot more sensitive. Like, he'd sit down and he kind of be like, look, we're going to settle down. Okay, I get it. I get how this is going. I get where we're at, but I need this and I need that. And Wayne wasn't like that.
Wayne was a lot more just to the point, and a bit more stoic about it.
I mean, he'll jump in to defend quite often. There was this almost like always ready for that, but then there was also this sort of weariness, especially as it all went on. You could just feel him getting tired.
His best work is actually when he's Old Man Roland in 2015. The old age makeup on him is really stellar. He does look really convincingly like an old man. And also when we get him, we see that there is a lot more warmth to him, but also a lot more sadness and pain because of the history of him having become basically an alcoholic loner. We see that human side of him come out quite a lot. The ending of episode 5 was amazingly well acted between the two of them. It's quite a sad, hard-hitting scene where Roland's kind of just yelling at him about dredging up their past and not having apologized. That scene was really good.
You could see the hurt there and the care there, and it kind of allowed you to balance different things in his character. You know, you've got that bitterness and that anger that has kind of driven him for a lot of the season, and the side that was just happy to be the guy's friend, and that was something that was really sad and sweet.
And some of his line readings, I think, play a part in that. The bit where Wayne says, like, look, I don't remember what the hell happened, but whatever it is, I'm sorry. He says in a very low, nice tone, it's all right. And in the blow-up scenes, I think he does great as well, like particularly like the very last argument that they have, and then the part where the slightly funny scene where he goes into the bar and just beats up people, but it's then followed by this scene of him kind of sobbing and hugging a dog. You get a sense in that scene as well of just how much Roland has really, like, now that the two most important figures in his life have been taken away from him, he just kind of loses it and, you know, can only find peace in a dog, basically. Scoot McNairy, who plays Tom, the father that goes through quite a lot of trauma, is really damn good as well. He's at a 10 quite a lot emotionally, and he conveys that really well too.
Carmen Ejogo does a good job. As
Yeah.
much as we're not liking the arguments the way it was done, I think her character developing was quite interesting. You could really feel that frustration. I really like the scene in the kitchen where she's talking to him about not wanting to have ended up like her mother. The idea that she felt like her goals were a bit almost sequestered by her marriage. I think she handled that sensitively without it feeling like the character was whining or complaining. More like it was very matter of fact. At the same time, there was this kind of emptiness to it as a statement. I think she did a really, really good job at putting across with the way that her voice kind of jumped, but it stayed flat, if you get what I mean.
I do think she's out-acted by Ali, but she still matches him quite well. So to move on to direction, we see that they used the dementia aspect in the filmmaking too, and that was quite ambitious in a few of these sequences, the way that they use the language of film to convey his messed up sense of time.
It very much was in the way that they cut it and the way that it was framed, as opposed to some weird transition or ellipsis or things like that, which they'd usually use in those circumstances, and made it quite interesting to watch, because it's all you needed to know, really, and it kind of kept you immersed without distracting you with some sort of flashy detail, which was nice.
Some of the editing, but also in some of the visual things that they do, how there are some of these scenes where it's almost like Wayne is looking back into his own mind and seeing these memories take place. Final episode, when they're driving up to the house of Watts, the guy who's going to tell them everything, we see all three versions of them in the car at once. First of all, I was wondering how they did that, and also it's a good visual sort of indication that they've basically been on this path ever since 1980. Not to mention, I think there are some like very suspenseful sequences in this season too.
The kind of build up to all those rednecks going to attack Woodard was a conversation he was having with Wayne as well. That was really, really tense, because you've got this emotional connection with the person being attacked and obviously the detective. And you knew that anything could set things off. And when you realised the police had shown up as well and the guy was still going, you just knew that wasn't going to end well. And it was a really, really effective bit of dread. Any sequence that was in the woods for me, I was just like, okay, here we go.
Yeah, and yeah, they visit the woods a few times, like you see at the beginning when, you know, like the body of the son is found.
His blood on the rock, and then the confrontation with Edward, you know, that in the woods, and that was uncomfortable.
It was, and I liked was that it was quite subversive as well, because probably the creepiest scene was the ending of episode 7, because although we know that Wayne's not going to die, there's still such a sense of uneasiness and creepiness when you have the two cars outside his house and the voice on the phone telling him, like, yeah, I want you to come in this car with me. We don't know what happened in that meeting. We don't know the specifics. So for all we know, this could be where we're going to see a lot of scary stuff. And then, although there is definitely a threatening tone to it, when we actually see Hoyt himself in person, he doesn't come off like a evil mastermind. He comes off more like just a really tired old man who wants Wayne to just stop badgering him or like investigating this stuff. You know, he comes off almost like a weary guy who has had to deal with a lot of tragedies.
He's almost just there, just like, look, it's not getting you anywhere and it's clearly going wrong. Just drop it.
It is part of that episode 8 subversion as well, where we find out like the truth. Although there were a lot of evil actions done and some covering up, it's not quite what we thought it would be. Any murder mystery, I think, whether or not you like this season will probably depend on whether or not you like the payoff of it all.
I personally really love the payoff because I like the ambiguous side of it. I liked the fact that it wasn't neat and it was messy and people just then didn't end up all that great, because I feel like that's how those cases tend to pan out. So I like that being reflected.
It also speaks to like us as like human beings, that sometimes what we want in a situation might not end up being what that situation actually was the whole time. And you see that, like, you know, conspiracy theorists and stuff, and you see that quite a lot with this situation as well, because there's almost a part of you that wanted it to be, you know, an evil human trafficking empire that Wayne could have like brought down somehow or exposed. But in reality, it's like, no, like not only is it not that, but it's in no way a clean.
Even morally, it was not clean, because there's so much found out with the mental illness of it as well, and you're kind of there like, oh my god. The reveal with Isabel is quite tragic. They frame it that way as well. They don't give you the neat closure, or really, they don't really give you a villain.
Really, the only one who's kind of a villain is the Harris character, because he's the one who does the most evil stuff in terms of framing a couple of people and killing them as well.
Harris also pretty much gets his comeuppance because he just gets shot.
I liked overall that the season was fairly bold and not afraid to do some daring things. Or the last scene, what do you make of that? The bit of him presumably back in like Vietnam. How did you interpret that scene?
Proceeded pretty quickly with Hayes watching his grandchildren on the bike. That's kind of what they proceeded with. So the whole ending is meant to be like, all right, he's done now, he's settled now. But then by showing it back to the war, it's showing that he's still, because of the dementia, that moment of happiness is still a war to him.
Because it's clashing with all of the tragedy of his life, you mean?
Well, yeah, exactly, because he's still contending with all of that tragedy in his life. And there were parts of it where even he was saying, I feel like I never came home properly. Bits of it that feel like he thinks he's still in war, like, especially in that scene where he's talking to Woodard about, and he's trying to talk him down. You know, there's very much that idea that, you know, he's not out of it. And then I think it almost encapsulates the tragedy of the whole thing, which is he never really got out of that mindset. And even at that age, with everything he wanted to accomplish done, he's not done.
So that's quite a good interpretation. So the way I saw it, personally, is I kind of saw that final bit as a bit of an acknowledgement of the whole nature of time throughout the season, and how it's going back to before any of these events actually took place. And it's almost as if like it's showing Wayne back when he was a tracker in Vietnam, and gives this kind of look into the camera and then walks off into these bushes and disappears. And I saw that during a moment, it's like he got a flash, he got a vision, he got a sense of how his life was going to be before any of this took place. And they were playing around with that idea very subtly, very slightly. So I kind of saw that as almost a continuation of it. But you could look at it and kind of think to yourself that what it is it's kind of more symbolically supposed to be he's going into the jungle and his mind is further going to be lost and unraveled, or he himself, he's going to lose himself in the jungle of his own mind. You know, you could make that cool as well. Well, this was a very, very solid season of TV. It engaged my mind, and it also engaged me emotionally too. Like there were some like really good affecting sequences that are still sticking with me.
I was quite impressed with this series as well. I think it worked. I think it's worth watching for sure.
So next time there's going to be another kind of change up as well. The next video I'll be doing like this will be kind of a summary of the movies of 2021. See ya.